This weekend, we take a break for a while from the Gospel of Mark, which is the main Gospel for this year, and instead our Gospel reading comes from St. John, which, as I mentioned previously, can in many ways be seen as the Gospel of Easter, in the same way as Luke is that of Christmas. We have also moved in time and place from our look last week at the Transfiguration. In fact, going backwards in time, according to the order of things in John's Gospel. The chronological sequence of Gospel readings can at times be difficult to follow. It appears quite clear where this passage sits, as it comes immediately after that to describing the wedding feast at Cana, found only in John, but generally seen as the beginning of the public ministry of Jesus. Following this event, John tells us they returned to Capernaum for a few days before going up to Jerusalem, some 80 miles away. Despite the first of the signs, often referred to as miracles, at Cana, very few people would so far have had any hint of the nature and identity of Jesus when he arrived in Jerusalem, and he had not yet begun openly preaching. What he found was a very dubious, if not downright dishonest, system centred around the temple, which lies at the heart of the Jewish religion. The community could not make its offerings and sacrifices without the services of the priests, who would not only receive the offerings, which they themselves set or enforced, but also encouraged the sale of these offerings on site, as they benefited from a tax on the sales. It is worth noting that the Jews referred to in this passage can safely be taken as a reference to the Jewish authorities, the religious and civil authority being closely aligned at this time, as we have noticed before. These are the same chief priests, or the representatives of them, whom Jesus would challenge, rather than the term referring to the Jewish people as a whole. This distinction can actually be taken as normal throughout the whole of John's Gospel. In the face of this abuse, it is little wonder that Jesus is angered, and knowing that complaining to the temple authorities would be useless, he decides to take direct action. His reference to "my Father's house" may have been taken as the zeal of a religious man, rather than a hint to his identity, even the disciples not yet having told anything directly. We are told, though, that they recalled the words of Psalm 69, "Zeal for your house devours me, and the insults of those who insult you fall on me." Now, this is the translation of the psalm that is found in the Jerusalem Bible, which is the basis of our current lectionary. Other translations differ in significant detail. Most interestingly, one that says instead, "Zeal for your house consumes me as fire, and those who insult you insult me as well." This shows far more of an offence mutually suffered, as taken by father and son, or even more so by someone who is himself one with the insulted party. How the disciples heard the words cannot be known with certainty, but having looked at 4 different translations of this narrative, all the others point more closely to the oneness of the Father. Even the Revised Jerusalem, recently published, is moving more in this direction. Even if they heard the words more in this context, they cannot have been anything approaching full understanding at the time. The presumed holiness of the temple and the authority of the chief priests had not previously been challenged in quite this fashion, although in time it was this challenge that was to lead to growing opposition to Jesus by those authorities. All the while the disciples were growing in understanding of Jesus as the Christ. Even this early in his ministry, however, Jesus' own air of authority caused the authorities to ask him to justify his actions, rather than just having him forcibly ejected, as might have been expected. His response perplexes them, as they immediately presume he has talked about the destruction and rebuilding the temple itself, which they would obviously consider to be quite impossible. although ironically the temple would be destroyed by the Roman army within a generation when they put down the Jewish revolt. As John explains, with the benefit of hindsight, as he freely admits, Jesus was using the term sanctuary to mean not a building, but the true place in which the Spirit of God resided, within him rather than in a building. In time, the Jewish authorities would destroy this sanctuary, that is, the physical human body of his, but would rise again on the third day by his own power as part of the divine Trinity. With even greater hindsight, we can perhaps perceive that Jesus is setting out his agenda for his ministry, although he knows perfectly well that no one will understand it for some time to come, and even then not completely until after the resurrection. This interpretation, however, is only valid with the placement of this narrative where it is found in John's Gospel, as whilst all three synoptic Gospels also describe a very similar event, it is placed far later in their narratives, soon after the triumphal entry into Jerusalem that we celebrate with Palm Sunday. It is possible that there were two separate incidents at the temple. One can imagine the authorities falling back into their bad habits, though the descriptions in all four Gospels are very similar. John does actually record three separate Passovers in his Gospel, the last of these being the night before the Passion, and the only one recorded in any detail in the Synoptic Gospels. Alternatively, it may have been John himself who reordered the timing of a single event, most likely as a means of establishing the unique nature of Christ early in his narrative, rather than due to any lapse in his memory. Whether it occurs near the beginning or the end of Christ's earthly ministry, the event stands for itself. The essential point is that it is Christ who is the true temple or sanctuary. The building so important to the chief priests and their followers was only temporary, however imposing it may have looked, however long it took to build. Christ is the eternal sanctuary, existing from before time began and enduring until its end. His human body may have been struck down, but his spirit was untouched and restores him to a new life in a spiritual body, a body seen on earth after the resurrection, but now ascended to heaven and still living at the right hand of God the Father. Jerusalem fell, the temple was destroyed, and in time the world too will pass. Only the love of God, personified by Christ, will endure for all eternity. And of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.